Hey everybody, happy Friday the 13th. And because today is Friday the 13th, I thought it'd be great to do a special episode of Gary Talks about the Friday the 13th franchise. Today I'm going to rank all 12 of the Friday the 13th movies, and I have a ton of special guests lined up. From Part 3, the guy who brought the hockey mask to the franchise, Shelly, I've got Larry Zerner. The star of Part 6, Jason Lives, who played Tommy Jarvis, Thom Mathews. I have F'n Vorhees himself from Freddy vs. Jason, Ken Kerzinger, and the director of Friday the 13th, the final chapter, Joseph Zito. So we have no time to waste in this extra long episode of Gary Talks. Let's get right into number 12, the film that I consider the weakest in the franchise, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, takes the iconic slasher out of Crystal Lake and drops him into the gritty streets of New York City. Except, not really. While the concept had potential, the execution falls flat, with much of the film taking place on a boat rather than in Manhattan. And then even when it's supposed to be Manhattan, it's not. Except for that one shot in Times Square. Jason's presence in the city does lead to a few memorable moments, but the pacing is sluggish and the characters are forgettable. Ultimately, this entry feels like a missed opportunity, delivering more of the same rather than fully embracing its new setting. Coming in at number 11 is the movie I've watched the least amount of times. Yes, I've actually watched Jason Takes Manhattan more than this one, even though it's only slightly better. The 2009 remake of Friday the 13th. The 2009 Friday the 13th remake reimagines the slasher classic with a slick, modern look, but loses some of the original's gritty charm. It relies heavily on jump scares and gore, offering little new to the franchise. Jason is more brutal and calculated, making him a menacing presence, but the characters are one-dimensional and forgettable. For fans, it's kind of a nostalgic trip with updated thrills, but it lacks the atmosphere that made the original a horror classic. Next up, Jason X. Jason X, aka Jason Goes to Space, offers a wild mix of sci-fi and slasher horror. The film fully embraces its absurd premise, with F'n Vorhees becoming a futuristic, nearly indestructible killing machine, which is different from the normal, nearly indestructible killing machine he is. While the plot is ridiculous and the acting is campy, the movie knows exactly what it is. A fun, over-the-top ride for fans who enjoy cheesy horror and creative kills. Number 9 is the most unique of the Friday the 13th movies, Jason Goes to Hell. Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, is one that a lot of fans really hate. Me, I appreciate for what it tried. It's a bold departure from the typical formula, shifting focus from Jason's usual slasher antics to a bizarre, body-hopping plot. While the film introduces some interesting lore and tries to expand the mythology, it often feels disjointed and strays too far from what fans loved about the series. The kills are brutal and creative, but the lack of Jason in his iconic form is a letdown. But it did have the best ending of any Jason movie. At number 8 is the first ranking that is probably going to cause some controversy because a lot of people rank this as one of the best in the franchise, but for me, it was just okay, and that is the original Friday the 13th. The original Friday the 13th is a landmark in slasher horror, setting the template for countless imitators. With its eerie camp setting and suspenseful kills, it builds tension masterfully, leading to a shocking twist that still surprises people today, who think that Jason's always been the bad guy. While the characters are kind of forgettable, the film's atmosphere, score, and Kevin Bacon make it a genre-defining classic. It's a must-see for horror fans, laying the groundwork for F'n Vorhees' legacy, even if the iconic killer himself doesn't fully emerge until the next movie. Coming in at number 7 is actually the first Friday the 13th movie that I ever saw, but I didn't see it on the big screen, or I didn't even get to see it on VHS. I watched it on late-night TV in a very heavily censored version, and my TV was a tiny little 13-inch black and white TV. Not the most ideal circumstance to watch the movie, but it still grabbed me, and I've been a fan of the franchise ever since. Friday the 13th, Part 3. Friday the 13th, Part 3 is a pivotal installment in the slasher franchise, mainly because it introduces Jason Voorhees' iconic hockey mask, which would become synonymous with the character. The film takes advantage of the 3D craze of the early 80s, with many scenes designed to exploit the technology. There are tons of objects, pitchforks, eyeballs, even a yo-yo thrust toward the camera, which adds a campy, fun charm when you watch it today. And speaking of campy, fun charm, who can forget that disco theme song? It's a fun, if formulaic, ride that solidified Jason as one of horror's most enduring figures. And now, one of the stars of Friday the 13th Part 3, the man who played Shelly, Larry Zerner. And we're lucky to be joined right now by the man who played Shelly in Friday the 13th Part 3, Mr. Larry Zerner. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Gary. My pleasure.
Today's episode is dedicated completely to Friday the 13th, and like I said, Shelly is kind of iconic. How did you become involved in this movie?
Well, I was a struggling actor, as everyone is in Los Angeles, studying acting, going to college. And I had a job on the weekends handing out movie tickets to sneak previews of movies, which is something we do in Los Angeles. And these two people come up to me and they said, "Excuse me, are you an actor?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm an actor." And they said, "Well, we wrote this movie and we think you'd be perfect." So that was Marty Kittresser and Carol Watson, who were the screenwriters. And, they saw me in Westwood and they're like, fat, afro, what you see is what you get. That's me. It wasn't like De Niro, gaining 60 pounds for the role. Like, that was it. They're like, that's the guy. And basically, I was discovered on the street corner. I hadn't done anything professionally before then.
But that's like the Hollywood dream, to be discovered on the sidewalk, and that happened to you.
Yes, you don't have to be blonde with big breasts to have that happen to you.
As younger audiences may not realize, Friday the 13th Part 3 came out in 3D. Was it shot that way? Like, did they use special cameras? How was that done?
Yeah, we were one of the first movies to use this new 3D where it was clear glasses. It wasn't the red blue. I know most people have seen the movie on television or on DVD or video, and it really in 2D, and it really loses something because the movie is meant to be seen in 3D, and there's all those shots that are specifically made for 3D. The everything sticking at the camera and thrown at the camera, and so I would tell everyone if you haven't seen the movie in 3D, you just haven't seen the movie. It's just so much better. Go see it in 3D.
Of course, Shelley introduced the hockey mask, and I know there's no way you could have known how iconic that was going to be, but at the time, did you know they were going to use this hockey mask in other Jason movies, or was this going to be a one-time thing?
Well, no one was thinking of future movies. I mean, that wasn't a thing. I mean, we were the third, but there wasn't like, oh, there's going to be 12. I mean, I knew it was cool. I knew enough I asked if I could have the mask. They said no. I wish, otherwise I would be retired now because I would have sold it for a gajillion dollars.
Well, I mean, if you weren't considering any other movies, you certainly couldn't have foreseen that 40 years later, people would still be talking about this movie.
It's amazing. It's that I wanted a career as an actor. That didn't really work out. But I have this movie on my resume, and there's nobody who doesn't know what that is, right? Everyone knows Larry gave Jason his hockey mask in Friday the 13th. And there's like no one who doesn't go, oh, that's cool. It's amazing. And that I get to go to conventions and I sign autographs and I meet fans and get to hang out and people treat me like I'm important. And it's, it's amazing.
A lot of you may not know this, but Larry is one of the best entertainment lawyers in the business. My wife and I used him for a case a while back, and we still talk about how he is a pit bull and one of the best lawyers out there. So any of my friends in Los Angeles, if you need an entertainment attorney, be sure and check out ZernerLaw.com.
Even outside of LA, if you need, you're making a deal with the studio, I can help you.
All right, yeah. But as an attorney now, who knows the law, as well as someone who is an insider on this franchise. Can you kind of explain what's been going on with this Friday the 13th lawsuit, and are we ever going to get another Friday the 13th movie?
Well, okay. So the lawsuit was resolved. I mean, in that Victor won, and then Victor made a deal with Horror Inc., which is the company that owns the other rights. And so they came up with this plan that they're going to do a TV show called Crystal Lake. They got affected by the strike, and then they were about to start shooting last month. And Brian Fuller was the showrunner, and he got removed from the project. They haven't quashed the project, but they have not yet announced if they're going forward with the TV show. And the plan was that they would not do any movies until they had the TV show. I mean, I think it's a shame that it's been so many years since they've had a movie. I think they should just, in my opinion, they should forget the TV show and just get to the movies or figure out a way to double track them. Do them, alternate universes or whatever. But get some movies out there. They're just losing money.
Well, it already sounds like we've got the next movie, Jason Goes to Development Hell.
That's right. It's good. Good.
Well, thank you so much, Larry, for being on the show. Friday the 13th Part 3 is such a fun movie, and hopefully everyone has a chance to check it out on the big screen in 3D.
Thanks so much.
If ranking the original at number 8 caused any sort of controversy, then ranking this one at number 6 most certainly will, because most people truly hate this movie. And I truly hated it the first 5, 6 times I watched it. But then for some reason, I just started to really enjoy it. It made me laugh, and now it's definitely one of my favorite rewatches of the franchise. Friday the 13th, A New Beginning. Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning, tried to take the franchise in a different direction, but the result was divisive. The film features a copycat killer instead of Jason Voorhees, which disappointed many fans expecting the real deal. It's this franchise's version of Halloween 3: The Season of the Witch. While the kills are frequent and inventive, the plot feels disjointed and the characters are mostly forgettable. But it's unintentionally super fun, and it makes me laugh all the time. I think that it was an interesting experiment that maybe didn't pay off, but set the stage for a great next movie. Coming in at number 5, Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood, introduced a new twist to the franchise, with a telekinetic heroine facing off against Jason Voorhees. While the concept is fresh, the execution is uneven, with the psychic battles feeling out of place in the otherwise grounded slasher series. The film features some of the best makeup effects and a more menacing, zombified Jason, but it was hampered by heavy censorship that dulled the impact of all the kills. But despite all that, I really loved it. It's as close as we're going to get to Jason Voorhees versus a superhero. Coming in at number 4 is quite possibly the most fun movie in the franchise, Freddy vs. Jason. Freddy vs. Jason delivered on the long-awaited clash between two of horror's biggest icons, Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees. The film effectively blends the dreamlike horror of Nightmare on Elm Street series with the relentless slasher brutality of Friday the 13th. The movie doesn't take itself too seriously, embracing its inherently campy premise with a mix of gruesome kills, dark humor, and fan service. Both Freddy and Jason are true to their roots, with Robert Englund delivering a menacing yet playful performance as Freddy, and Ken Kerzinger embodying Jason's unstoppable force. In the end, Freddy vs. Jason is pure popcorn horror, offering exactly what it promised: two legendary slashers duking it out in a bloody, over-the-top battle. That version of Jason Voorhees is most definitely my favorite version, so I'm extremely pleased to share with you the interview I had with the man who played Jason in Freddy vs. Jason, Ken Kerzinger. Thank you so much for being on Gary Talks.
You're very welcome. Nice to be here.
Well, like I said, you are my favorite Jason, and I think it's astounding that you could go one-on-one with Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger in a costume where no one can see your face and you have no lines.
Well, that was a tough job because on and off screen, because Robert is a legend, and I found that out in no uncertain terms when we went to promote the movie in Europe. And we could not go any place without Robert being recognized. He is a legend and really helped me through the whole process of becoming one of the Jasons who, Jason is big all over the world too. People might not always know who played him because of the mask, but there have been 9 people that have played Jason, and I was very, very fortunate to become one of them. And on a crossover with the Elm Street franchise. And, Robert, first time I met him, we'll be seeing each other all the time now, conventions, I'll tell you all about it. And so Robert and I have stayed in touch over the years, and he's just, he was a blessing to work with in that situation.
Well, to take a step back, though, you're not only an actor, you also have been a stuntman and been a stuntman in a ton of movies for many, many years. Did you want to start off as a stuntman who became an actor? Did you want to do both? Exactly how did you get your start in the industry?
I think, I wanted to be a stuntman, and there was nobody around really growing up that I knew that it was a stuntman. Certainly, I grew up on Vancouver Island, which is off the coast of Canada. And but I read an article about Hal Needham, a very famous stuntman, and thought this is something I want to look into. This is when I was like 12 years old. So over the years, I kind of kept my ear to the ground and found out what I could about stunt people. And then when I made the decision to become a stuntman, I went down to Los Angeles to find out about it. And when I got back to Vancouver, there was a few people who had just started and were wanting to build a stunt industry here, and I was all for that. So in the beginning, I certainly wanted to be a stuntman, but I ended up getting cast as, because of my size, I ended up getting cast as a lot of, henchmen and thug number one, and, or cops. And then they started throwing me lines. I remember the first line I ever got was, I showed up on set and they handed me here's your sides. And it was like one line, yeah, boss, but do you think so-and-so, or, how nervous I was about that. And then, just over the course of time, you build up a reputation. Okay, we can throw this guy a line. And then I finally got an acting agent while I was doing stunt work. But I was so busy because the industry was blowing up here at the time. We had Stephen J. Cannell moved up to Vancouver and started doing Wise Guy and Jump Street and all those old series, Hat Squad. And so, my career took me heavily into stunt work, and then as time went by, I started enjoying it. So I started asking for it, looking for acting jobs, and I got a few over the years, and of course lucked out with Jason on Freddy versus Jason.
And you also worked as a stuntman on Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, right?
Well, I was the stunt coordinator and the stunt double for Kane, and the fry cook that he kills in the diner.
So how exactly then did you go from Jason's stunt double in Part 8 to becoming Jason himself in Freddy vs. Jason?
Uh, they came up to Vancouver to do Freddy versus Jason, and I was being interviewed for the stunt coordinating job. And the line producer at the time was sort of listening but not listening, kind of looking at me, and he finally said, "Hey, Ken, would you be interested in auditioning, to play Jason?" And I thought, sure. So they had me go into a room, put on a cheap white Jason mask. Then they had me walk around the room, and they sent that to Ronnie Yu. I had a brief interview with him, and I got the job. I think, because of my past experience with the franchise, that helped. But they were also looking for a bigger Jason, and so that helped. Yeah, it was just a fortunate set of circumstances. They were looking for a new Jason. They came to Vancouver to shoot the movie. I had some experience. It all fell together.
That's amazing. So when you're cast as Jason Voorhees, does your life immediately change?
So I didn't think it was that big of a deal. I was doing the movie, and I just didn't think it was that big of a deal. Then I started hearing from my family, hey, because I'm not on any social networking things, and my family started calling me up, and they said, "Do you know what a big deal this is?" And the internet's lighting up that the fact that you've been cast as this character. But I think when it really hit me was we were doing San Diego Comic-Con, and Robert and I went to do a radio interview, and we came outside, and there was like 20 people outside this chain link fence, screaming at us. And I turned to Robert and I go, what if this is like number one of the box office, and it was number one for 2 weekends in a row. all of a sudden, people knew who I was. I started, promoting the movie and more people found out. So it was a big difference for me being the stuntman in the background to, getting the role of Jason. Certainly. It just, but that I think that's when it really hit me.
Well, as a fan, ever since Jason Goes to Hell, when, he died and the claw comes up from the ground and grabs the hockey mask, we were waiting for that movie. We couldn't wait to see it. We were like, finally, Freddy's gonna fight Jason. And then, the movie didn't come out, and we kept waiting and waiting, and then it seemed like it was never gonna come out, and then finally it was announced, and it was big. For horror fans, it was like the Beatles going on stage with the Rolling Stones.
Yeah. I saw the same thing. I watched it and I saw the glove came out and take the mask and I thought, oh, this is going to be great. They're going to put, Freddy and Jason together. And I thought that's kind of a natural thing to do. They did it with the werewolf and Frankenstein and all that. And then, it took 10 years for them to get a script that they could agree on. And man, there I was playing Jason and Freddy versus Jason.
It's been forever since a new Friday the 13th movie. I mean, there's been these lawsuits and the TV show that then failed and they don't know what they're going to do with it, and who knows when we're going to get another Friday the 13th movie. But if they announced a new one and they set out to make a new one, would you be interested in donning the hockey mask one more time?
Oh, without a doubt, for sure I'd do it again. It's just such a fun role to play. And yeah, it's a shame that they, because it's been over 20 years now, I think, since Freddy versus Jason came out, and people have been screaming for a sequel ever since. Um, and hopefully they get around to it because, Robert has said, I think that he does, he probably wouldn't reprise the role, but these days they could make it so much easier on him. Although he's such a perfectionist, he'd probably want all the makeup again and stuff like that. But I mean, with the CG that they have now, I mean, he really doesn't have to do that. And his voice and his presence, his body movements, they're all Freddy. People, just want him to play Freddy. And so I hope they get around to it. And because I know that people would love to see it.
Well, I know I would. I just want to thank you for being a part of this very special Gary Talks episode dedicated to Friday the 13th. There's no way I could have done an episode like this without Jason Voorhees making an appearance. Thank you for being a part of the show.
Just want to say to everybody, thanks for sticking with Freddy versus Jason all these years and coming out and saying hi, and wish you all a happy Friday the 13th.
Coming in at number 3, Friday the 13th, Part 2. Friday the 13th Part 2 is also known as the one with the burlap sack. Before Jason got his hockey mask, he's just a weird-looking hillbilly living in a shack. Now, why he never went to see his mom, which might have stopped her from going crazy and killing a bunch of kids, I guess he had his reasons. Part 2 has my favorite final girl of the franchise in Ginny, and it also did a pretty good job of making you care about the kids before they got killed. Friday the 13th Part 2 delivers a mix of suspense and grisly thrills, with inventive kills and a creeping atmosphere that keeps you on the edge. While it does lean into classic slasher tropes, its pacing and tension make it a solid follow-up that set the stage for Jason's enduring legacy. The top two in the Friday the 13th franchise are neck and neck for me. I go back and forth over which one I enjoy more, but ultimately, I have to put this one at number 2. Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, is a true standout entry in the franchise, blending horror with a sense of humor. The film kicks off with a daring opening where Tommy Jarvis, now an adult, accidentally resurrects the iconic killer Jason Voorhees. This installment is a breath of fresh air, infusing the series with a self-aware tone and almost comic book-like quality. Jason, now an unstoppable undead force, delivers a mix of gory kills and darkly amusing moments. The choice to make the film more tongue-in-cheek while still being scary revitalized the franchise. With its memorable, inventive kills and that fun meta-narrative, Jason Lives stands as a high point for fans looking for thrills and laughs in their slasher fix. Fans of the franchise know that the character of Tommy Jarvis appeared in parts 4, 5, and 6, each time played by a different actor. But my favorite version of Tommy was from part 6, played by Thom Mathews, and I recently had a chance to sit down and talk to him about that movie, as well as Return of the Living Dead. Everyone talks about the final girl. That's a very popular trope in horror films, but no one ever really talks about the final boy. And of the final boys, the one that stands head and shoulders above all others, especially in the Friday the 13th universe, is Tommy Jarvis. And we're joined today by the man who played my favorite version of Tommy Jarvis in Friday the 13th Part 6 Jason Lives, Mr. Tom Mathews.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Before you'd been cast in Part 6, had you seen any of the other Friday the 13th films? Were you a fan of them?
I had seen the first one, and then other than that, I hadn't really seen them. No, I wasn't really a fan, but after I got cast, I went back and rewatched the first one up through 5 to refresh my memory. And also to see, Tommy was in 4 and 5, as you know, and to see if I could pull any kind of mannerism or some kind of anything to put over in my version of the Tommy Jarvis we did.
Well, as you kind of mentioned, Tommy was featured in parts 4, 5, and 6 of the franchise, but each time he was played by a different actor. How did you go about getting cast in part 6? What was that process like?
I got the sides. My agent sent me over the sides, and I studied them, and then went in to read for the casting director, and then got a call back. And next thing I knew, I was over at Paramount Studios over in Melrose. And there's about 25 to 30 people in the room, and just auditioned. And I was up against, I think, 3 or 4 other guys.
Was it one of those audition rooms where everyone looked the same, or looking around, could you tell that they weren't quite sure what they were looking for?
No, we all kind of looked the same, blonde hair and blue-eyed. I think they're trying to stick as close to John Shepard's look as possible.
And right around the same time, you were cast in another horror franchise that people love, Return of the Living Dead. And both that and Friday the 13th Part 6 came out in about a year of each other. What was that like?
Yeah, I got cast a year apart on both of those. And that was my first, I did The Woman in Red. That was my first film role that I did. A little scene with the Charles Grodin, rest in peace. And then Return was my first big part in a movie. And that was a lot of fun. And we actually rehearsed for 2 weeks before we actually started principal photography. I think why they worked out some legal stuff, but that was very helpful for all the actors. And it's a lot of fun filming that movie. It's a great character, start off as a innocent young punk rocker and turn into a brain-sucking zombie. So it's a lot of fun for an actor to play.
Of course, that movie is one of my all-time favorites. Watch your tongue, boy, if you like this job.
Like this job. And then I got Friday the 13th, Jason Lives, a year later.
When you watch Part 5, A New Beginning, it's pretty funny, but I'm not really sure that was intentional. But when you watch Part 6, it's also pretty funny, but watching it, I have an idea that was what you guys were setting out to do. Is that the case?
Tom left the funniness to the other people. My character wasn't put in those kind of situations, but like the paintball guys, that was pretty intentional. And then Nancy McLaughlin doing the American Express was pretty funny. But that definitely was all intentional for sure.
And it also has a killer soundtrack. I love the Alice Cooper song.
Great soundtrack. Fantastic.
I know Tommy has appeared in comic books and video games and things like that, but he hasn't been in a Friday the 13th movie since Part 6. And it's really popular right now to bring back an original character like Jamie Lee Curtis in Halloween, or they tried to do it in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So if they made a new movie and they wanted Thom Mathews back as Tommy Jarvis, would you do it?
I would love to reprise my role in the 13th film of the franchise. That would be amazing, yeah. And I think they should go back, and Jason Lives is definitely a beloved film in the franchise. And just to continue that story, it would be really cool. 38 years later would be really great. And I think, people are it's one of the movies where the fans get invested in the characters. There's a little romance thing going on with Megan, the sheriff's daughter, and Tommy in that movie. So that was left a lot of hope, and so that was a lot of fun. So I think people got more emotionally invested in part 6.
Well, we are out of time, so I just want to thank you for being a part of this episode of Gary Talks.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And now my number one movie in the franchise. I mean, it has Crispin Glover, it has Corey Feldman, it has The Dance, it has so many awesome things, and that's why it's my favorite. Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Friday the 13th, the final chapter is a grisly, high-octane entry that lives up to its name with a blend of horror and dark humor. The fourth installment brings Jason Voorhees back for a final showdown, although the title is famously misleading. Director Joseph Zito delivers a tight, suspenseful film with an emphasis on shock value and inventive kills. The practical effects were done by mastermind Tom Savini, and they are gruesome and memorable, adding to the visceral impact. What sets this sequel apart is the introduction of the character of Tommy Jarvis, this time played by Corey Feldman, which brings a new perspective to the series. And let's not forget this one also starred Crispin Glover.
He thinks that's funny. He thinks that's a funny thing he's doing.
And this iconic dance.
Don't think you got it made, no, you're wrong.
While the film ultimately doesn't mark Jason's final appearance, the final chapter is a standout for its compelling mix of horror, tension, and great characters, solidifying its place as my favorite in the franchise. And now, all the way from Bangkok, Thailand, here is my interview with the director of that film, Joseph Zito. We are now joined by legendary producer and director of Friday the 13th, the final chapter, Joseph Zito. Thank you so much for being on Gary Talks.
No, it's great to be there.
As I mentioned in the show, Friday the 13th, the final chapter is my favorite film in the franchise, but you've also directed some great kick-ass action movies, including one of my all-time favorites, Invasion USA. As a director, do you tackle a film any differently if it's a horror film versus, say, an action film?
It's a big difference because when you're working in a horror film, you're trying to maintain that mood, that somber mood, if it's somber, or violent mood if it's violent, and trying to keep in that mindset. Whereas, with action film, it's completely different. You're managing a much, much bigger production. And there's so many more people and it's so many more layers to it. To do a film like, Red Scorpion, in the end of the day, I think there are almost 500 people worked on the crew of that movie. Okay, not at one time, but as we moved to different locations, picking up other people. So that's way different from making a horror film in a small location, with a manageable crew.
I know you had done The Prowler previously before doing Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Is that what led you to getting that movie, or how did that come about?
So there was a producer, Herb Nitke. He screened it for a friend of his, Phil Scuderi, who was in Boston at the time, and was in fact the owner of the Friday the 13th franchise. And Phil called me and said, hey, I just saw The Prowler. And he says, it's not going to make any money. I said, that's like crushing. I just finished the film. He says, it's not going to make any money. So I'm thinking, well, if it doesn't make any money, I'm not going to be able to ever work again. And he says, however, I'm going to make another Friday the 13th. And when I make another Friday the 13th, I'm going to want you to direct it.
Oh, wow.
Now, the chance of that happening, I don't think Phil would have even seen The Prowler. They happened to be friends, the two producers, or competitors at least. I don't know how friendly they were. They knew each other. And it just happened like that. It was very lucky and very fast.
I know that when you took the gig, they really did think that Friday the 13th, the final chapter, would be the last movie in the series, which, of course, we know is not the case. But while you were shooting it, did you ever start to hear scuttlebutt that maybe they were interested in continuing the franchise?
No. Okay. If there was scuttlebutt, it was coming from me. So the thing is, no, it was the final chapter, and Paramount, Frank Mancuso Sr., who was the the president and then ultimately the chairman of Paramount. They told me that's the end. This is the last one. You just kill the beast. We really don't know how to make these movies. You guys know how to make them. I don't want to get yelled at shareholders meetings anymore. This is the end. We're finished. Hollywood being what it is, you never know exactly when you're being lied to and manipulated, which you can imagine, you could assume is most of the time. But I believed that they were not going to make any more. And I thought, well, if I can keep this open at the end and they do make more, that'd be like kind of a big win for Paramount, for the studio, for the franchise, for me, and career-wise, I might get more opportunities to do things. So I constructed the ending like it is, so that it could be continued. With Corey, with the Tommy character.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I think sets this film apart from all the others in the franchise is, I mean, first of all, it is the best directed film, but it has my favorite gore effects done by the great Tom Savini. But most of all, you have super relatable characters in this movie. I mean, these teenagers felt like real teenagers, and for the first time, we liked them so much that we hated whenever they got killed, unlike in other typical slasher films where you're just looking at your watch waiting for the killer to start killing them. Was this something that you set out to do?
Yeah, we thought about that a lot, and it wasn't about competing with the other films and saying, "Oh, we can do something that is going to top them in some way." It wasn't about that. It's that we looked at the previous Friday the 13th, and you understood what they were and how it worked and what the audience was experiencing, and when they were rooting for Jason and when they were rooting for the victims, and how you had the opportunity in directing such a movie to try to work that audience response.
Yeah.
You know what you're making. You're making Friday the 13th. You understand the audience's mental set when they go into the movie theater. So you have to be sure you're delivering that and not just a John Hughes youth comedy. But we tried to make them, if not, I think real is too self-congratulatory, but we made them more easier to identify with some elements of them, of the characters.
Oh, yeah, well, like I said, they're really relatable. And it's interesting you bring up John Hughes because there are certain scenes in this movie which I think are very close to a John Hughes film where you just want to follow these guys, see what they're up to, and maybe in some other universe this was a movie without a serial killer and, it really is just a John Hughes type teen comedy.
But that balance is really difficult, because if, let's say, partway through the production, Paramount came and said, "You know what? Take that guy with the mask out." You'd have to then flesh out those characters an awful lot more.
So one of the actors in part 4 is Crispin Glover, and he is known to be an eccentric character. I'm not sure exactly when that started for him, but when you were directing this movie, was he already that kind of eccentric guy, or had he not come up with that persona yet?
Yeah, I don't know where it started, but he certainly had it. Crispin is a more than a movie just in and of himself. I mean, the experience of Crispin off screen is maybe more entertaining than on screen. So, I mean, he's a wonderful piece of theater. That's the only time I've known Crispin. I ran into him once after, but basically, my experience with Crispin is only Friday the 13th, and the studio was a little bit afraid of him too, because they knew he was Crispin.
Right. I actually saw him at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood. He showed one of his movies, and before it, he did like this 1 hour presentation that was almost like some sort of avant garde performance art. And I'm sitting there thinking, is this an Andy Kaufman thing? Are we seeing a character, or is this really Crispin Glover?
Crispin would stop me. We were under a lot of pressure to get this done in a short amount of time and kind of tight money and all. And Crispin would stop and he'd show me this book that he had written. And everything's written really, really small little diagrams. And he'd want to recite the whole book to me. I mean, I want to go off and try to get the shot. And he was so, it's really important to him that you saw this and you understood it. And he'd look at you waiting for your reaction. And, you couldn't make any sense of what it was anyway. But Crispin was wonderful. I mean, really, the movie would not be the same without him. Well, it wouldn't be the same without any of them. But Crispin really did some wonderful things, I believe, to help that film. And it was, his quirky, crazy ability. But most everything was scripted. I mean, it wasn't that he just was doing improvs. Although what I will say, that I cannot take credit for that crazy dance, because that dance was a dance that Crispin was doing around town. And I had heard about that. So, I mean, okay, I'll take a little credit for having the idea to put it in the movie, but that's Crispin's dance. I don't know. It's one of the great dance moments in the movies that I've seen. So,
I mean, even when they put those movie packages together that show dance scenes from Footloose or Dirty Dancing or Saturday Night Fever or whatever, a lot of times they'll show a clip of Crispin Glover doing the dance from your movie.
yeah, I didn't know that I was going to end up with a film that had that element in it, but you know, in Friday the 13th, you wouldn't expect it. But there it is up there with John Travolta and all the greats.
Well, I just want to thank you for doing Gary Talks all the way from Bangkok. I know you're on set there working on a new film. I really appreciate it, and it was great talking to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the complimentary words, and it was great fun talking to you. Thanks.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Happy Friday the 13th, everybody. Be sure and watch one of these movies tonight, this weekend, and look back on one of the greatest horror franchises of all time. Next week is a pro wrestling episode, as I take a look at the history of pro wrestling in my old hometown, St. Louis. And as a special guest, I have my #1 favorite wrestler of all time, the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels. It's an awesome interview. Hope you guys enjoy it. See you next week.
From capes to tapes, Gary's on the case. He's breaking down each scene, every place. On Gary Talks, he's quick with his peculiar wit. From plot twists to the comic strips, Gary's